Aloha and welcome to today's Deep Roots Native Plant webinar on the road to Maplewoods Natural Area. I'm having a great time visiting family in Hawaii, and some of you have commented in the chat wondering what I've been up to. So I just want to share with you all very briefly that I'm having a great time exploring the flora and fauna here, both in Oahu and Kauai. And as some of you may know, I'm also an artist. And so one of the ways I learn about our natural history is by doing drawings. So I've been having a great time here, seeing lots of eels and pufferfish and tons of endemic species, which can only be found here in the islands of Hawaii. So I'm having a great time, and I want to encourage you all to visit your natural areas, no matter where you're at, and take the time to explore and see what's out there. It might inspire you. All right, let's get this show going. We have a wonderful episode today, as I mentioned, at Maplewoods Natural Area. We visited this space over in Gladstone, Missouri earlier this year to check out the spring ephemerals with Chuck Connor. He's a community forester with Missouri Department of Conservation. And today we have returned to see how the landscape has progressed since spring. It's going to be a great show that covers a lot of forest ecology and discusses where this old growth forest is at in its life cycle. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Missouri Department of Conservation, who protects fish, forest, and wildlife, as well as connects folks to nature in their backyards and beyond. And I'd also like to thank our viewers and donors like you for making programs like this possible. If you like our webinars, you may consider joining us for our in-person annual Native Plant Conference. Planet Native Landscapes Conference takes place every February in Kansas City. You can join us February 11th through 12th for 2 full days of native plant presentations for both professionals and nature enthusiasts. Some of the topics will include planting and maintaining green infrastructure projects, what wild plant populations can tell us about planted gardens, woody plants and pollinators, native plant solutions like perennials for shade, working with neatniks to create sustainable native landscapes, and much more. Be sure to register for the early bird pricing, which ends on November 22nd. I'll be sure to include links to our Planet Native conference following today's episode. I want to also give you a heads up. We have a really great episode coming up on the Nelson Island branch, which is on the Kaw River with Johnson County Parks and Recreation District. This will be our next webinar on November 7th. I am super excited to visit this place and share with you a virtual hike. I've never been here before, but I hear it has a history of bootlegging as well as some pretty fabulous migratory winter birds, which, if you don't know this already, winter birding is my favorite winter sport. So I hope you'll join us at the beginning of November to check out this very cool location, which we will then have an in-person guided hike following that webinar. This webinar will be recorded and all the resources will be available online. After today's show, I will send you an email with all the resources discussed today, and there will also be a survey attached. If you could please take a moment to complete this brief survey, let us know how we did, and let us know if there's any topics you want us to cover for next year. I really appreciate when folks give us their feedback. And don't forget, drop your comments in the chat and put any questions in the Q&A. Our guest expert, Chuck Connor, will be joining us for the Q&A after to answer your questions live. It's always a great time. After today's webinar, please visit us online at deeproots.org, where you can find information about upcoming events, webinars, native gardening resources, and how you can get involved. While you're there, consider making a donation. All right, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Chuck Connor. He's going to be our guest expert today, and all of you may be familiar with him. I'm a huge fan of Chuck myself, and he is a community forester with the Missouri Department of Conservation in the Kansas City region. He has over 36 years of experience as a professional forester. He works with trees and the people who care for them in Jackson, Cass, Lafayette, and Johnson County, Missouri. His duties include 2 counties of private land forestry technical service and urban forestry program delivery in the Kansas City metro area. He has previously worked for the forest departments of Southern Illinois University, South Dakota State University, and Purdue University. He has 10 years of management experience in the landscaping industry and is an International Society of Arboriculture Certified Arborist Municipal Specialist. He also has very cute cats. So, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started on today's program. And remember, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section so we can answer them live following today's footage. Thanks so much and enjoy.
Hi, my name's Chuck Hunter. I'm a community forester with the Missouri Department of Conservation, and today we're at Maple Woods Natural Area.
My name is Chris Blunk. I'm a district supervisor for the Missouri Department of Conservation. Well, I think all Missourians should have a connect with the great outdoors. I mean, it makes us feel good. You're out there and enjoying today, beautiful fall day. We haven't had one of these for a while, so it's just, I think, healthy, good to get out and enjoy nature, get involved with it, and just enjoy it.
Yeah, basically, like I mentioned when we were out here the last time in March, this is oak, maple, basswood forest, and it's aging out where it's at the end of succession here, and it's at climax. And the oak trees in the upper canopy are starting to die out. This one had some, you can't really see it on this side, but there's some rot in it, and the wind blew it over. And what's coming back in now are the shade tolerant species, primarily sugar maples here. So it's going from a oak, basswood, maple forest to pretty much a maple basswood forest, because it's going to those shade tolerant species in this final climax forest here. So the problem with invasive species, though, is they can live in the understory in the shade too. Like, we know that there's a ton of calorie, also known as Bradford pear, back in here. And when the oak die out, they leave these gaps of sunlight, and instead of the natives being able to compete for that, a lot of times the invasives outcompete our natives on it. So you'll get pockets of release of calorie pear in here where it used to be sugar maple. So there was a crack here, and it started to grow or seal over that, but the crack went deep in it, and then the wind just put it up. It's broke here too.
How old do you think that tree was? Do you know?
I have no idea. If you give me a saw, we could find out. Every year there's a layer all the way around a tree called the cambium. And in the spring, think of it like stem cell tissue, where it starts to divide. Outward becomes phloem and inward becomes xylem, which make hollow tubes that carry water from the soil to the leaves for photosynthesis, to make food for the tree. So to age a tree, in the beginning of the year, spring, there's more water available, so it puts really big xylem cells up. And then as spring turns into summer, those xylem cells become smaller because there's less water. It needs smaller hoses to get it up. And those big rings followed by small rings make the growth rings in the tree that everyone's seen, and you can count those and determine the age of a tree. So
I had no idea. I've always wondered, like looking at a tree, like a cookie, right? A cut from a tree. Like what do those lines mean? They're different in every way, so that's really cool.
So the big tubes are called spring wood, and the thinner, smaller tubes are called late wood or summer wood on that. So,
That's perfect.
and usually the amount, how thick that spring and summer together are, is how good a year it was for the tree. If it had a lot of water, it may put a quarter to a half inch growth ring on, depending on the species of the tree. But if it was a drought year, less available water, it may only grown a little bit. So
That's cool.
the last 2 years before this fall, we went into September through, I'd say about mid-April, we were incredibly dry, and a lot of people don't realize that because it's winter time and plants are dormant. But that's extremely hard on trees and woody plants. And what occurred then is every year it seems like we get leaf out a couple days earlier. Spring comes earlier, so those plants were really stressed with drought. Then they put their leaves out. Then, since they leaved out earlier, we still got hammered with a frost. And then a lot of plants had to re-leaf out, cut a whole new check on stored energy, and leaf out a second time because the frost damaged those first tender leaves, and all under really bad drought stress. Now this year, we've had pretty good moisture up through into July, but then we got into mini drought again. And again, like we were talking, I got over 3 inches this past weekend, so that helps. So, but we still need some good consistent rain every week or two just to get these plants healthy in the fall before they go dormant. And as far as changes in climate and weather patterns, we seem to be warming up earlier than we used to. And what happens with that is plants, like I said, they leaf out earlier, but then we still get those frosts, that we can get in April, and the trees get frost damage on those tender leaves and then have to leaf out. So one of the things, we tend to warm up earlier and get bud break earlier than we used to. We've also gotten warmer. When I first moved out here, we were 5B, and now we're 6A or B, depending where we are. And so we've definitely warmed up, and some plants that used to not do well here now do. I see they're selling crepe myrtles at nurseries, and I would have, when I first moved here over 20 years ago, I would have thought, the winter's going to kill those back, and it doesn't anymore. So we've got armadillos now that we used to not have 20 years ago here. So that warm up, we're getting a shift in species, that used to be confined south of us, that are moving up slowly into this area due to either animal migration or human moving plants up. We also, even if we get average rainfall events, it seems like we're getting less rain events, and there's more. So instead of, and I'm just making up numbers to make it easier, instead of getting 20 rainfalls a year of 1.5 to 2 inches, we're only getting 10, and they're 4 inches. And we get a downpour, and then we get another mini drought for a month or two before the next rain event. And with clay soils, a lot of that just runs off. So even when we hit an average rainfall or precipitation year, they seem to be coming in fewer events spaced wider apart, which isn't as good for plants either.
I noticed a little orchid hanging out here, and this is just finished flowering. Looks like it's starting to go to seed. And I believe it is, when we looked it up, it said it is called autumn coral root, and I can't even pronounce that Latin name. I'll try. Coraliza odontoriza. Something like that. So something kind of cool that I learned about autumn coral root is that it is mycoheterotrophic, which means that it doesn't obtain nutrients through photosynthesis. It actually takes nutrients from mycorrhizae fungi from beneath the soil. It's also a self-pollinating plant, so it doesn't require pollinators to complete its cycle. Very cool.
I was hoping to maybe find a pawpaw left, but it's like sweet corn. The keys know.
I know. They do. Well, and also the people.
Yeah.
So I just want to make a quick note about ethical foraging practices. So it is pawpaw season. So if you are out in the woods and you see pawpaws, I think it's great to be able to experience them and try them, but be sure you're leaving the majority for wildlife. It frustrates me to no end hiking at places like Hidden Valley and seeing people taking out grocery sacks of pawpaws when you know you can't process all of them, and our wildlife needs it a lot more than we do. So just consider who else relies on that food and enjoy the fruits of the forest. So here you can see the ground layer here in the forest beneath all of these pawpaw trees, and the browning that you're seeing here are Solomon seal that were in bloom earlier this year, late spring, early summer. And now that they have completed their process, they've gone to fruit, they've dropped their seeds, and now the plants are dying back and going dormant until next year. So just kind of cool that you can see just the different stages of the forest. You can see the seasons that preceded us, which is pretty neat.
Pawpaw is a shade-tolerant understory tree, and it forms colonies by it puts a pawpaw comes in and it puts roots out, and then you get clones from the root system. So you'll see, like you do here, you'll get like a big colony of pawpaw, and so it grows both by seed and by the root system, and but it's in the custard apple family, and again, the fruit kind of tastes banana-ish. It's a soft fruit, a soft mass. So soft mass is like you can't store it, but it's all you can eat when it hits. Blackberries, pawpaw, persimmon, all those are soft mass. Elderberries, really good for wildlife, but again, it's a burst of energy in a short amount of time, whereas acorns you can actually store, or put in a log or bury in the ground and keep those through the winter till you get spring browsing opportunities in early spring again. So this won't get you through the winter, but it'll get you a little fatter for it. These are oak acorns, and a lot of wildlife, they're missing the caps have fallen off of them, but a lot of wildlife uses these to get through the winter, and it is a hard mass, which means you can store this and cache it and come back to it later, and it'll still be good for food. And but deer, turkey, a lot of animals will use these to get through our winters. The genus Quercus, which oak is part of, the oak group, all the species of oak, more species of animals depend on that genus than any other plant in the world. Oaks go all the way up, almost not quite to the Arctic Circle, but well up into Canada. The most northern oak in North America is the bur oak, and that's what you see out on prairies. If you've seen Dances with Wolves, that one huge tree out on the prairie, that's a bur oak. And we have a lot of those around here, but there are two groups of oaks, red oak and white oak group, and you want both of them in the woods because they have different maturities on their acorns. They both flower every year, but white oaks will mature and drop that in 1 year. Flowers in the spring, food in the fall. Red oak flowers in the spring, and then the acorns stay on that whole year, and then it flowers the next year too, with last year's acorns still on them, and those acorns from a year ago mature and fall that fall, so 2 years. And the reason you want both of them in your woods is if we get a late frost in April when the oaks are flowering, and let's say we got one this year and it killed every oak flower in the woods here, you're gonna get that fall 0 white oak acorns for your wildlife, because all the flowers got killed this spring, right? And it's one growing season, so no white oak. But you're gonna get a bunch of red oak because it's from flowers that occurred the year before the frost. So then next year, everything flowers again, and you're gonna get white oak acorns on the ground, but no red oaks, because 2 years ago all those flowers died. So if you have both red oak group, which contains multiple species, and white oak group, oaks in your woodlot, you have to have 2 consecutive back-to-back frosts to not get any acorns that fall. So you want those both in there, and it helps. On size of transplanting, I wouldn't do seeds, because too much goes wrong with seeds. They can mold, they may not germinate, squirrels can dig them up and eat them. You got to plant hundreds a lot of times to get one plant, and so I would go with either seedlings, which our state nursery sells, or larger, and it just depends on where you're putting them. Seedlings are hard to see, they're easy to mow up, they're easy to vandalize, you can just step on them and break them. Deer like to browse them, so especially if you're like planting oak, I would want to plant something with size on it to get that top bud above browse height, so they can't chew that and make it into a shrub. But again, it just depends on how much money you have and what the site and your needs are. In general, I like to get them big enough where you can see them, but not too big enough where they've lost so much of the root system that it's hard for them to get through transplant shock. So like thumb-sized trunks up to 2 to 3 inches are good. Now those 2 to 3 inches, you got to realize on a bald and burlap tree, 2 and 3 inches of trunk, those will weigh 400 or 500 pounds. They're hard putting in. Where like a containerized tree that's 1 inch in diameter, kind of thumb size, you can carry those around without throwing your back out. Those are usually what I plant just because they're easy. You've got to address the circling roots and other things. We've got planting recommendations, how to plant trees. Read that before you plant. But from seedlings, depending on what your application you're going to plant them in, seedlings up to 2 to 3 inch diameter. Like a lot of cities want 2 to 3 inch diameter because you see them the day they're planted and they're harder to vandalize and steal. So if you plant anything larger than 2 or 3 inches in diameter, like if you spade in something huge, if you don't irrigate that in summer drought, they usually die. If you want an instant big tree, you've got to dedicate yourself to keep it mulched and irrigated. And the problem with those, they've lost so much of their root system through that spading process that it usually takes 4 or 5 years at a minimum for them to get out of transplant shock and start growing fast again. Where if you plant a 2-inch caliper or even thumb size, you're looking at maybe 2 or 3 years at the most before that tree regrows its root system to the point where it's past that transplant shock stage. I'm trying to get a good one. Let's see if we can't find something fresher. I'm not sure. There we go. bark beetle. Here, see it?
Yeah.
Where it galleried out. Watch yourself.
So what? Yeah, what? So this tree is dead.
Oh yeah, it's been dead for a while, but it still makes excellent wildlife habitat, right? You've got woodpeckers will come in and eat those beetles. Salamanders will live under the bark. If the bark stays attached to the tree, bats can nest up in that and roost on it. So a standing dead tree is what we call a snag, and they make excellent wildlife habitat as long as it's not over like your driveway or the kids' playground. If you've got a woodlot and you've got trees that are standing dead, that's excellent wildlife habitat, and you want to keep that in your stand. So that's very good. In fact, if there aren't dead standing snags or trees in there, we'll girdle them and kill them ourselves to put them there. But the droughts have been doing that just fine without our help lately. That and imported insects like emerald ash borer killing all the ash trees. Is the oak litter is more leathery, and there's no oak here where they stay around longer. It's the maple and the basswood and elm, and those decompose quicker. So you had spring ephemerals here and some leaf litter from last fall, but those have all been incorporated back in the soil. This is how you know this is a true forest and not a woodland, because with a woodland we'd have a lot of prairie plants in here all summer long because they're getting enough light. Now, woodlands that have had fire removed out of them, their canopy in time closes, where you still get prairie plants, but they usually don't have enough sunlight to bloom, where you'll get goldenrod, for instance, but it just stays vegetative all the time. And in time, if you don't do a thinning and reintroduce fire to keep that canopy an open woodland, you start to lose those remnants of the forb understory and grass understory in a traditional woodland. And it starts to go more and look more like a forest when it's truly a woodland that's just had fire removed from the ecosystem. One thing I would like to say, just on kind of an end note, and Aldo Leopold said this in the 40s, and it's still true today: until we stop treating land like a commodity we own and treat it like a community we belong to, we're not going to get any better on any of this. So we need a mind shift on that. And stay tuned for question and answers with Sydney and Chuck.
All right, y'all. How about that? Chuck, that was fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're coming in perfect. All right, we've got some really good questions here in the Q&A, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Deborah first asks, should we be watering our old oak and walnut trees like crazy right now? I take it we haven't had rain in a bit. What are your thoughts, Chuck, on watering trees in general as we move into fall and go into winter?
Yeah, I don't know. Everyone in the metro area pretty much is bone dry right now. And as far as watering mature trees, you can't really give them enough to make them good, but anything helps. And I'm to the point now, in fact, I'm watering trees today as we speak. I've been dragging a hose from one tree to another. So yeah, again, this is the third fall now in a row, Sydney, that we've gone into fall and dormant season bone dry again. We taped this several weeks ago, and I just had a 3-inch rain, but that's the last rain we had too. So we're powder dry. I was at a tree planting event a week ago, and we were digging down, a foot and a half, and there was no soil moisture at all. So yes, water what you can. walnut and oaks are generally, since they're native, they're well adapted and they're kind of used to droughts, even with what we're getting with climate change. But especially anything that's newly transplanted, like within the last 5 years, I'd concentrate on those, or anything that has significance. Grandpa planted this tree with me, the stuff like that I'd concentrate on. But yes, any supplemental irrigation you can get from now till we get decent rains, if we get decent rains this fall, would be great.
And Chuck, do you have any recommendations on how long someone should put their hose and water a tree? Like, what do you do in
Yes.
yeah.
Concentrate from the branch tips in, because roots will go 2 to 4 times the distance of the branches. They grow way far out there, but they're more within what's called the canopy drip underneath the branch. Sprinkler, and see how long when the sprinkler's going it takes to give you an inch of rain. So once you get an inch of water on there, just wait. And I would do that every 7 to 10 days till we get a decent rain. That's an effective way to water. And again, the less time they spend in the landscape, the more critical that is, because they just don't have that big colonized root system that a well-established tree has, Sydney.
Okay. And just to reiterate, because you cut out just for a moment there, but so I think what you said was put the sprinkler on and have your little rain gauge. And once that rain gauge hits 1.5 inches, then you kind of know how much water you've gotten. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
An inch to an inch and a half, and do that every week to 10 days.
Okay. And what about once we get into frost, like freezing temps?
Well, if the ground's frozen, it usually won't percolate down in there as much either. But realize on a tree, and what he plants, the roots will continue to grow underground as long as that that ground isn't frozen. So what I usually do is there's a limit, though. How much I live on county water, so there's a limit on how much I can afford to water. But usually, what I try to do is I'll hit at least around the Thanksgiving break. If we're really dry again, and that tree's important to me, I'll water it really good. I might put 2 to 2.5, 3 inches of water down and just really soak it one more time before I put my hose up for the winter.
Good deal. That's really good insight. Hey Chuck, can you go ahead and explain the difference between a forest versus a woodland?
Okay, in general, a forest has many vertical layers in it. It's got a forb layer, an ephemeral layer on the ground, and then it's got a shrub layer, a small tree layer, a mid-story layer, and then a dominant and codominant layer. So a forest is going to have many layers of trees in it. And the easiest way to tell is in the spring, you'll get spring ephemerals on there, but as the leaves of the trees above it leaf out, they shade that so much that by summer there's hardly anything green in the understory on the ground. Where woodlands, you just have mature trees, and then a woodland, primarily prairie plants and grasses in the understory. And the reason you get that, so a woodland is going to have herbaceous and grass cover on that understory from spring through fall, because there's enough light getting through the trees to the forest floor to keep that ground layer, that ground flora, blooming and growing. Where with a forest, you've got so many layers of trees and shrub layers that when they're all leafed out, they shade the ground so much. You get your Solomon seal, your Jack in the Pulpits, all those spring ephemerals, they come up, they bloom, they produce seed, and they got to do it all very quickly, ephemerally, because by the time July comes, they've been shaded out with so heavy a shade, nothing's growing there anymore. So again, woodlands are going to have just big trees primarily if they're not degraded. If they've continued to have fire run through them, they're going to have mature trees with prairie grasses and forbs maturing all summer long as an understory, where forests are many layers and you get dirt primarily by July, August.
Awesome. That's a really great definition. Okay, so folks are asking about pawpaws. Fawn is asking about the pawpaw grove that we saw at Maple Woods and says it looks like a monoculture. Can you talk a little bit about why pawpaws, what they do with clones, as Regina asked, what their purpose is, and whether or not pawpaws are allelopathic? So just curious about pawpaws in general and the purpose of them spreading as clones and whether they prohibit the growth of other plants.
I do not know. I know if they. Okay, I do not know pawpaws or allelopathic. Walnuts are percent sure, Sydney. As far as a monoculture, yes, they're a monoculture. It's a clone. That's the definition of a monoculture, is one species. But these are actually genetically the same plant. They just they put suckers up or new stems from that. And so what occurs is a lot of times that clonal colony can't, since they're clones, they can't pollinate itself, and they rely on flies that have visited another pawpaw colony that's genetically dissimilar to come in and pollinate those fruits on those. So.
Okay. And sorry, Chuck, you did cut out a little bit there. If you want to switch to phone call in so that we can, and I'll have you kind of reiterate your answer once you come back. But while you're reconnecting, I'm going to go ahead and define what allelopathic means for those in our audience who may not be familiar. So allelopathy is a process or a chemical that is released by certain plants. Shrub honeysuckle is a really good example of allelopathy, where the fruits, as those fall, they release a chemical that prohibits the growth of other plants. And though Chuck had said he's not entirely sure that pawpaws are allelopathic, I would gander that they're not, considering at Maple Woods and other areas where I've seen pawpaw groves, there are other plants growing beneath them, like herbaceous perennials, like the Solomon seal you saw in today's episode. So I will find out, though, after a little bit of research, whether or not they are allelopathic. But what they do spread as a colony, right? So you'll have a couple plants. Oh, here we go, Chuck. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I don't know if I'm coming in over my phone.
You're coming in great, actually.
I...
Oh, can you hear us, Chuck?
Well,
okay, great. Okay, so Chuck, can you go ahead and talk again about pawpaws in regards to them colonizing, and why do pawpaws form clones if they can't pollinate themselves? What's that all about? Oh, and we might have lost.
Well, no, I had it on mute. Can you hear me okay?
There we go. Okay, great.
Yeah, I dropped the phone because I didn't have the password or the passcode to get on. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to keep my video off, and maybe I'll get fast enough internet to help on that. Sydney, I don't know what the evolutionary advantage was of forming clonal colonies. And a lot of our plants do that. The sumacs do that. They do the same thing with forming clonal colonies like that, and other plants do too. So I'm not sure what the evolutionary advantage of that was, where that plant, pawpaws and others, developed that clonal colony, but who knows? Um, I know it does give them more area. You know, they've got more area to colonize, and that community root system. You know, if it's wetter on one side than the other, in theory they can share that water through the whole colony. The same with nutrients in the soil and photosynthesis. Prove, you know, if it's sunnier on one side of the patch, in theory, some of those that energy through photosynthesis could be shared through that community root system. So, but as far as uh, why they did that, I don't know. You're going to have to ask the guy in charge on that.
That sounds good. Well, thank you. And then one other thing. So with pawpaws, you need to have separate pawpaw plants. Like you couldn't just plant one pawpaw and get fruit. Is that correct?
Well, it depends on how far the flies that pollinate pawpaw will travel. And I doubt anyone knows that for sure, but maybe someone does. And it also depends on how close the next pawpaw that's genetically different is away from that. So there's a lot of variables in that, and I don't know. So these are good questions because
These are great questions.
yeah.
That's why we need more interested folks like you all here in our audience to bring these questions to light and get out there and do some research. You know, I think this is really exciting to think about. I mean, I would love for someone to do a study on how far does a fly go to pollinate different species. I think that'd be a pretty cool research project. Okay, Chuck. So another follow-up question on pawpaws, and then we'll shift to a couple other questions here. Deborah's asking, at approximately what age do pawpaws start producing fruit?
I don't think it's very much. I would say 7 to 10 years, but don't quote me on that because with everything, you know, you get 20 people, as we all learned in middle school, right? Some of us become sexually mature and go through puberty much earlier than others, right? So
Yeah.
you're looking at genetics of the plant itself. What kind of environment that plant is. Does it got really good soil or is it growing in bedrock pretty much? How much sunlight does it have? How much rain has it had in those first few years of growth? So there's a lot of variables in these. And a lot of times when you get an answer to these, you have to realize that they're just estimates, right? Your results may vary. So, but they're averages of the plant itself, and it may be, you know, they may become sexually immature in fruit much faster in Alabama than they do here in Missouri. So there's a lot of considerations you got to take into effect. But I wouldn't think. I have one that I planted in my yard and it started flowering. It hasn't ever set fruit yet, but it was flowering in 5 years here. So
Cool. That's awesome. Well, yeah, and I think it's good to know that those when nurseries or even just in your observations say like, you know, there's a age range or time range when these can produce fruit. It's definitely depends on variables. So I like that. I like that thought that results may vary. So just another great reason to be super observant of your surrounding landscapes because that can lead to a lot of answers or clues. So. Okay, so moving on, Ash is one asking about spring ephemerals. Um, they're asking if they want to encourage ephemerals in an area, should they rake up most of the oak leaves? What are your thoughts on that, Chuck?
no, the all plants that are forest quote plants in our area have evolved over millennia with that oak or whatever is above it, whether it's basswood, sugar maple oak, but they've evolved to have that leaf litter. And that leaf litter also, even if you don't have a fire, which turns it into somewhat of a fertilizer, uh, you've got all your insects and invertebrates and earthworms that break that leaf litter down in the organic layer into mulch, a natural mulch, and there's nutrients in that. So raking leaves and raking grass and all that stuff you want to do in your yard. Yeah, don't do that if you're doing native plants or if you're in a native environment. Forests have gotten along just fine without us. There's two ways to kill plants in a landscape: horrible neglect and too much love. So, and people are usually on one end of the spectrum or on the other, and you need to be somewhere in the middle. And with again, uh, in a forest environment, they historically don't have fire in them because there's just too much shade and there's not a continuous fine fuels on that floor to carry a fire through. Where if you got a lightning strike, it just kind of peters out after a little bit because there's not that grass floor layer like in a woodland to carry the fire. So yeah, nature will take care of itself. What we really need to do now in the environment we're in now, especially with the global economy, is suppress invasive plants. Because the reason they're invasive, exotic invasives, is because they can outcompete with our natives. They just do better because they haven't evolved in this ecosystem where they don't have the parasites, predators, or just uh, they can outcompete the natives. So where you need to help, if you have a forest or a woodland on your property, where you need to help is you need to keep walk it and check for invasives, and if you find them, start suppressing those before they get to a population where it's just overwhelming for you and the native plants. That's how you can help your native ecosystems out in our area. Suppress the invasives.
Yep, that's absolutely right. And for those who feel hopeless or, kind of depressed about that whole conversation, I promise you, once you start working on removing and suppressing those invasive species, it does get easier. Not to say that they won't continue to pop up, because they will, right? Because as Chuck mentioned, the non-native invasive species we have do not have the biological pressure to keep them in check, as our own native flora and fauna do, because of evolving in this area for millennia. But once you say remove invasive honeysuckle out of a forest, you go back every year and continue to remove it, it does get easier because you have smaller ones that come up. They're easier to pull, as an example of the honeysuckle. So keep up the good work. And it is a never ending chore, but that's part of being a good land steward in this day and age. So thank you for that, Chuck. That's really
Well,
inspiring.
before we move on, I'd just like to add, realize, and I've done this a long time, and it is work, and it is hard work, but you don't have to get it all right. What we're trying to do, if you can get it all, if you've got a small enough patch and you can get every plant, that's wonderful. What you're trying to do is keep that population suppressed. It's still there, but it's there in a population and density where it isn't completely shading out your native plants. So you just realize suppression is better than letting it go. I feel that too many people try for 100% control. It's too much work, so they quote, give up. Don't give up if it's too much work. Just let let some of them not go, but you don't have to keep it 100% control. Just keep at it, and yeah, yeah,
That's a really
keep
good.
up the fight.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chuck. That's a really good perspective. It's easy to be a perfectionist when it comes to invasive species removal, but I'd never thought about it in that way. So thank you for sharing that. That's really insightful, and given your years of experience, that gives me a lot of hope too in the areas that I steward. So thank you for that note. Okay, so we have our final question from Deborah Sweeten. Deborah is wanting to know about, so Deborah loves bats, as do I. And they're trying to keep habitat effective for bats that they're seeing, but the population appears to be declining. Do you have any suggestions on trees with certain bark that support bat habitat or brooding and things like that?
Um, any bark like shagbark hickory would be good to plant because it's got that loose exfoliating bark on it. Um, I just listen. If you plant native plants and take care of them to get them established and suppress the invasives, nature's going to take care of itself on that. So just keep it native is what I would do. If she's got a place to put up a bat house, maybe that's an option too. As we all know, bats right now are experiencing a disease that's very bad on them called white nose syndrome, and that's knocked that population down some, quite a bit, in fact. And until they work through that and get a genetically resistant populations of those, or if we find a way to help manage that, the bats are kind of hurting right now, along with other things. But again, the way we fix this, and I'm putting "fix" in quotation marks, is we realize that the land isn't a commodity we own; it is a community we are a part of. So to do that, we need to, as much as we can, in the scope of the land we own and in the way that we live our lives, we want to, what is native here, and that's going to switch over time too, as climate heats up here, again, more stuff that used to not be here from the south, either through assisted migration, through people planting the trees, or it's still slowly moving up, we're going to get a different palette of plants in time. But as long as they're native and they're slowly moving up enough where the animals can migrate with them, it's going to be different, but maybe it won't be horrible. So, but again, we're part of the land. The healthier the land is, every research we do, the greener the community where you live, work, play, and go to school is, the better off we are economically, socially, and health-wise. We are part of our environment, just like a dolphin or a whale. So if you want to help yourself and others, plant natives, take care of them, and suppress the invasive species. That's how you fix this.
Chuck, you are the best, and I just want to thank you so much for your inspiration. You are truly a incredible steward of our land and a fabulous educator. So I just want to give you a heartfelt thank you, and I know that our audience feels the same way, as I can see in the chat and the Q&A that we've had today. So folks, give your thanks to Chuck, and we appreciate everybody for tuning in today. And I'm just going to leave us here on one note. If you, wow, I'm so inspired by that talk. Sorry, it's giving me goosebumps, chills, all the above. So I hope you all will join us next time for our webinar at Nelson Island Branch with Johnson County Parks and Recreation District. Until then, go ahead and go water your trees and go ahead and suppress some invasive species, because this time of year is a great time to do that. And in the meantime, take care, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks, Chuck.
You bet. Thank you. Hope to work with you again soon, Cindy. Bye-bye.
Absolutely.